Good morning. Mr. Mayor, ladies and gentlemen, heroes of Iowa's and neighboring states' preservation movement. I'm honored and delighted to help you kick off your 2016 summit and to be so warmly welcomed in this beautiful city. Thank you, Mary, for that introduction and for your leadership of Iowa's Department of Cultural Affairs. And if I may, thank you to your colleague, Sarah Andre. She is a friend for 15 years. We met during a long but ultimately successful legal battle to preserve an important Native American site in a distant and strange land called New Jersey. The Black Creek site holds an archaeological record spanning an almost continuous 10,000 years through 500 generations. So naturally, the mayor of the town decided to bulldoze the site to create a sports complex. I was 6 months old as a litigation attorney when I got a phone call from a New Jersey Native American tribe asking me if I would be their pro bono counsel in this lawsuit in New Jersey, a state in which I am not licensed to practice. So of course I said yes. My opposing counsel was a 30-year veteran litigator of the wonderfully named law firm of Struble, Ragno, Petrie, Spinano, Bonanno, McMahon, and Aquaviva. So no one thought the case would last very long. As it turns out, it lasted 5 years. The site is now permanently preserved as a state park, beloved by the community. The town has a sports complex just down the road, and the mayor is no longer in office. Finally, I got a career out of it. I am today proudly one of the few but the proud cultural heritage lawyers. Every few years, the state tribes in New Jersey have a powwow at the site, and they honor people who stood up for preservation and respect for other cultures, including your colleague here now in Iowa, Sarah. The title of my talk this morning is The Future of History, such a modest topic, but I can think of no better audience, frankly, or time or place to dive into this scintillating, to me, topic than to be here with you right now in Iowa. Why? First, you are smart. Among American states, Iowa has the highest rate of literacy. You may have read that somewhere. Second, you cherish your past. In every Iowa county are people who work diligently to preserve and interpret history's lessons, written in lost objects in the dirt, buildings of wood, stone, and steel, and in landscapes full of lore. More than 2,300 Iowa sites are listed on the National Register of Historic Places, a truly splendid achievement. Third, you always have your eyes on the future. Iowans advanced the civil rights of racial minorities and women decades before most other states. You even, with our permission, help pick our future American presidents, for which we thank you. Maybe. But most importantly, the answer to the question of why I'm excited to be in Iowa, or as I like to say, Wyowa, is that you even preserve the history of the future. Merely an hour's drive west of our location is the future birthplace of Starship Captain James T. Kirk. I have not made the trek to see that marker, but I hope to because I consider it my mission to go where no member of my family has gone before. And for my final pun, I will say that whoever put up that marker was very enterprising. Indeed, I have to ask you, is it a coincidence that in the same year we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the National Historic Preservation Act, we celebrate the launch of the original Star Trek series? I think not. I don't believe in coincidences, I just believe in alignment of the stars. I want to thank you for laughing. I looked at the Adler Theater schedule for the next couple of weeks and noticed that a very famous comedian will be appearing in this exact spot 7 days from now. So I have told all of my slightly gullible friends back in Virginia that I'm coming out to Iowa to open for Jerry Seinfeld just a week or so early. I'm going to talk about the impacts of NHPA briefly. Over the next 30 or so minutes, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the past and a little bit more time talking about the future. But it's important to know where we've been to figure out where we're going. Within the past few generations, historic preservation has evolved from a limited pursuit of saving great houses and major landmarks into a grassroots movement concerned with preserving communities and everyday places important to our past. Enactment of the National Historic Preservation Act in 1966 furthered this evolution and signaled America's resolve to preserve its heritage and to use that heritage to improve the quality of life of its residents. Relying on public-private intergovernmental partnership, great progress has been made since 1966. Over the last 50 years, the key components of NHPA have provided the foundation for the modern heritage preservation movement. 90,000 places worthy of saving have been listed on the National Register, representing 1.75 million contributing resources. Federal historic tax credits have unleashed the power of private investment to the tune of $120 billion and growing. Nearly 125,000 federal actions or projects that involve a federal undertaking occur every year. And as you know, they generate a fair amount of traffic in terms of reports on the cultural resources that we have in our communities. And finally, federal agencies have programs and policies in place to ensure that the trust that we imbue in our public lands is honored. NHPA is not just a collection of statistics. It has, in many ways, provided the impetus for a larger movement. 59 states and territories in the District of Columbia, 168 tribal communities, over 1,900 local governments are regular day-to-day partners with the federal government in implementation and interpretation and action in the National Historic Preservation Act. According to a recent study by the National Trust for Historic Preservation in the United States, 15 million Americans self-identify as local preservationists, and 50 million Americans are deeply sympathetic to the cause and support it with their time as volunteers and with their financial contributions. While I think everyone in this room might acknowledge that we have yet to take full advantage of the power of this coalition, we are on our way to figuring out how to leverage it for greater influence in the public sphere. Now, as for the educational activity generated by this national movement, our fellow Americans visit U.S. cultural sites, including museums, heritage resources within public parks, and other historic sites more than 1 billion times each year. That is, for context, twice the amount of attendance at all major sporting events in the United States and theme parks combined. So in short, our movement, of which you have been a vital part, is shaping in major and measurable ways how our fellow human beings understand the role that history plays in their modern lives. I want to talk very briefly about Preservation 50, which is the name we've given to the year-long commemoration of this act. If you go to preservation50.org, you'll see a lot more detail than I have time to provide you today, but I invite you to do that, and I hope that you'll find a dynamic, interactive national community building up using as a jumping board the 50th anniversary. But my firm, Cultural Heritage Partners, has had the honor of planning this for 3 years, executing it for this year, and debriefing from it, or I should say recovering from it, in 2017 and beyond. We surveyed the National Historic Preservation community early in 2013, and we asked them, what are the 5 things, give us your top 5 things that you'd like to see us use the anniversary to advance for the preservation movement for the next 50 years. And the answers reflected an unusual consensus for a community not always known for its consensus. The first is that we should leverage it to build a stronger, more dynamic, more permanent coalition of federal, state, and tribal stakeholders who are in more regular communication. I think you'll see in terms of the sheer volume of activity under the Preservation 50 banner and the number of agencies and tribes and even private sector companies that have come to the table under this banner that we're making progress to achieving that goal. Second, we need to learn from the past 50 years. We have had many successes, we have had many challenges, and learning from those and fixing what needs to be fixed for the next 50 years is vital. Conferences like this, which are occurring in all 59 states and territories, are a vital way of generating that exploration of lessons from the past, and our job at Preservation 50 Central is to curate the best of what comes out of that and have it as a permanent resource library. Third, Americans told us to tell the story of heritage preservation's value to a broader audience. I won't go into too much detail, but I'll simply say that we have built a dynamic social media platform through which a post, let's say from the Iowa SHPO's office, used to be seen by everyone who subscribed to Iowa's Facebook feed, but now through a synergistic social media platform gets seen by folks all around the world who otherwise wouldn't have been exposed to it. I'll also mention, for those of you who are football fans, I know there's none of you in the audience right now, we bought a Super Bowl ad in the official paper and online program promoting Preservation 50 to an audience that everyone agrees has the time, professional resources, and influence to shape policy in the future. And as a consequence, that ad and the pro-preservation message was seen by approximately 50 million eyeballs. Is that 25 million people? I guess 50 million? Someone out there will do the math. Fourth, we need to educate policymakers. We're doing 2 things generally under that category. We are up on Capitol Hill advocating for permanent reauthorization of the National Historic Preservation Act and full funding. And then lastly, our goal, our 5th goal, is to take the opportunity to prepare the next generation of leadership of this movement. And by next generation, I don't mean necessarily young people by age. I mean folks who are emerging leaders in the movement. And to do that, we have partnered with a generous investment from American Express to design a leadership academy targeted specifically to emerging leaders in the movement, which will be pioneered beginning this October, both live and online. And we're excited for you to take a look at that and send us your best and brightest minds to participate. Okay, now, buckle your seatbelts. Keep your hands inside the car at all times. Let's fearlessly look more closely at the future of history. Here's where we sit today. Every 12 months, the entirety of human knowledge in terms of measurable data is now doubled. Our human-guided machines have produced more data in the past 2 years than has been produced in the prior history of humanity. The iPhone 6 can produce actions, commands, per second at 80 million times the speed than the computers that were used to send manned Apollo rockets to the moon. 90% of all scientists who have ever lived are alive today. Artificial intelligence is achieving deep learning. What does that mean? It means we program computers to do certain repetitive tasks, and some of those computers are learning how to do those tasks more efficiently on their own. And just to keep us humble, 86% of us still plug our USB devices in upside down and repeatedly. We are entering an age of exponential growth. This chart shows that our technologies are accelerating to the point of near exponential growth. On the left side of the curve is the printing press. On the far right side is the 3D computer chip. Let's talk about the time it takes for human knowledge to double. Up through the 1900s, it took us roughly 100 years to double what we knew. By 1945, it had dropped to 25 years. Currently, as we just mentioned, it takes 12 months. IBM predicts that with the emergence of the Internet of Things, which is the internet-based connections of all the stuff in our lives, the figure will soon be down to 12 hours. So you thought you were overloaded with information now. I realized that by using an image of C-3PO at the end of this image, that I'm mixing Star Trek and Star Wars metaphors. For those of you who care about such things, you can see me afterwards and complain. I'll tell you, I'm not a Trekkie, and I'll tell you why. When I was 6 years old, I had a series of seizures, and the doctors needed me to come in to do an EKG or an EEG, one of those brain wave measuring scans, and they needed me to be very tired when I came in. So they told me that I needed to stay up at 6 years old for 72 hours straight. And the only way my dad could keep me up was he found an endless marathon of original Star Trek shows, and we watched it for 50 plus hours. 49 of those hours were me sitting there with my head bobbing and him flicking me in the cheek. So it's taking me 30 plus years to get over the post-traumatic stress of seeing Star Trek. Now that I've started to watch it with my 6-year-old daughter, there are two impacts. I twitch when it comes on, or I immediately go to sleep. So please understand, I'm a liberal arts cultural heritage person attempting today to convey a message that is science and Star Trekky, but I come from it with a poet's heart. 70,000 or more years ago, human beings began making art to express culture, and culture was a product of a relatively new cognitive ability within humans to cooperate flexibly in large numbers, and they used stories to drive that cooperation. This capacity distinguished Homo sapiens from the other humans that were around at the time, who then soon after disappeared, giving rise to humanity as we currently understand it. The artifacts and practices of 70 millennia are our shared cultural heritage. The ways our ancestors and we organize behavior to advance our collective interests is our leadership heritage of a sort. So today, humans are engineering a new cognitive revolution via exponential growth in computing power. Now, mainstream futurists believe it is possible, if not probable, that within 100 years or fewer, this advancement may distinguish enhanced beings from Homo sapiens, who in turn may eventually disappear, at least in their current physical form, effectively ending history, human history, as we have come to know it. Ray Kurzweil, who is Google's 68-year-old director of engineering, lest you think he was a 20-year-old who knew nothing about the world, believes we can harness this awesome power largely for good. Stephen Hawking, famed theoretical physicist, thinks we should be afraid, very afraid, and that we should now be putting rules in place to significantly harness, if we can, and restrict exponential computer growth. Yuval Harari, the history professor and author of *Sapiens: A Brief History of Humankind*, says that cultural heritage stewards, the people in this room, have a narrow window in which to exert some influence on how the lessons of history and humanity get uploaded to future artificial intelligence. I'll pause for laughter. No, not a joke, right? So how big is our window? Let's hypothesize that I'm not completely crazy, or at least the people who I'm quoting are not completely crazy. Let's just hypothesize for a second that this is in fact possible. How big is our window, the folks in the room, to have such an influence? And let's give ourselves 20 years and see what folks predict the world will look like. 2036, the average person owns 100 webbed devices. Human hybrids have brain nanobots. We already have computers that are approaching the size where we can introduce them into our bloodstream. 95% of developed world diseases are eliminated. Artificial intelligence and human intelligence become indistinguishable, which is, some of you may have heard referred to as the Turing test. Minds, or at least what can pass as a mind of a person, it is hypothesized will be downloadable and uploadable by the end of the 2030s. And the singularity will be on the horizon within 10 years. What is the singularity? It is a theory that the invention of artificial intelligence will enter a runaway reaction of self-replication and self-improvement cycles, resulting in a powerful superintelligence that so far surpasses human intelligence that it signals effectively the end of the human era as we have come to know it. I find these predictions very hard to believe intellectually and emotionally, but I give them enough credibility that I'm willing to stake at least part of my reputation to come out here to Iowa to put them in front of you. I have a 6-year-old daughter, as I mentioned, and when I think about how these projections could impact or will impact her life, my first instinct is to grab a cold beer or 6 and to take a nap. But these predictions are not coming from quacks. They are largely being endorsed by the likes of Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg. Now, those folks may quibble about whether these occur within 5 or 10 years of this window, but there is a shrinking skepticism that they will happen in our lifetimes. So, let's talk about the 3 things that we might do in this exhilarating and somewhat daunting world to make sure that the artificial intelligence that we are beginning to create or have been creating for a while and that will escalate shortly has the flavor of humanity that you all have gathered up in terms of historical evidence over time. As members of one of the final generations of people built on the old 100% natural ingredients model, we may indeed have this short window of opportunity to influence how the last chapter of current Homo sapiens is written and how the first, maybe if we're lucky, second chapter of whatever comes after is written. To the extent that there is any cosmic measure of the value of the human experience on our sliver of time in the vast universe, perhaps this is it, and maybe this is our test. The question is, can we send the best of who we are and who we have been as a species into the DNA of future intelligent design? On bad days, like any day that you observe the current presidential election, for instance, this seems like a particularly tall order, given the smallness of the things that consume our attention on a daily basis. Indeed, to me, it only seems possible if humans hone three essential abilities in the next 2 decades. First, the ability to understand and glean from the wisdom of the past the lessons of history, both our successes and our many failures, from across time, culture, and ideology. This necessitates, in my view, creating laws and policies to ensure the preservation, interpretation, and accessibility of our cultural heritage. Second, the ability to lead people, which I view as both an art and a science. The ability to lead people and institutions ahead of potential exponential growth toward an existential future. In my view, this necessitates fundamentally reorganizing and re-engineering the curricula and the pedagogy of leadership development across all sectors. And third, we need the ability to cast the widest possible net to bring in as intellectual and human resources in this endeavor minds from across the spectrum of humanity. And that is why I think we need to continue to commit to equal opportunity and civil rights, because the greatest human minds available to us to take on these challenges are sometimes coming from the slums of India or some of the neighborhoods I've been to in Petersburg, Virginia. Giving those people access to this conversation is important, not only to tell the full spectrum of the human story, but to make sure that we have the greatest minds capable focused on it. So for the record, I am trying to practice what I'm preaching to you today with my spouse, who's also a cultural heritage attorney, a significantly better one, I might add, and our teams. We are building ventures that attempt to connect the wisdom of the past to the leadership of the future. A brief set of examples. We mentioned our firm, which has the pleasure, the privilege, and sometimes the pain of being one of the only firms in the world focused exclusively on cultural heritage law and policy, and we're trying to think outside of the typical lawyer box, to think strategically about policy change beyond just domestic preservation law. In addition, in the next 2 months, we will be announcing a private sector venture that will bring augmented reality technology to the cultural heritage sector. So if you're still awake after this talk, be in touch with me if that's of any interest to you. Our leadership development efforts are in the form of building university-based centers. We have built 5 of them, focusing on civic and political leadership, social sector, nonprofit leadership, entrepreneurship, and cross-sector leadership. That is, taking these skills, I think that's an actual bug and not a miniature robot, taking the leadership skills from across the public, private, and nonprofit sector and bringing them together, because problems, as we all know, are not solved in those individual silos. And finally, our civil rights and equal opportunity ventures are focused on initiatives that bring innovation to severely economically distressed communities. So, what is the point, Greg, you are asking? There are 4 technologies. PricewaterhouseCoopers just released a study of 150 of the emerging technologies out there. They picked 8 that they called megatrends. And by megatrends, they mean these have the potential, if not the likelihood, to fundamentally alter the way we go about our daily lives. I've chosen 4 for the purposes of just highlighting them to you today that I think have a particular potential to impact and be impacted by the cultural heritage sphere. I won't go into great detail. We've already begun talking about artificial intelligence. That is the gorilla, elephant, choose your large animal in the room. Augmented reality is, I believe, in the next 5 years going to fundamentally transform the experience that people have when they go to cultural heritage sites. Drones, you know about those. In Virginia, some of my friends shoot them down. Other people are thinking, how can I deliver a burrito? Yesterday, I think Virginia Tech delivered its first bean burrito via drone to someone in their community. And finally, 3D scanning and printing is part of the larger message around digitization. The only way for us to benefit from the work that you have been doing for generations in the field is for the papers that you've got sitting on your shelves, the images that you have to become digital and readable by machine languages. This is an Italian UNESCO site in its current form. If you show up today and look at it, this is what you'll see. When you don the augmented reality glasses that are now being produced by Epson, the printer company, what you'll see is superimposed on that real-life scene that you're experiencing, what it looked like and how it functioned when it was fully built. Lots of fun little videos I can share with you if you continue with me on my nerd obsession after this. Almost done. What are the 7 things that you all could be thinking about, and let me clarify that you could be thinking more about, because many of these are things you think about on a regular basis already. The 7 things that would help position our field better for an exponential era. The first is patently obvious to you, but bears repeating: inclusion. The more voices we have at the table, the more stories we tell, including the stories that have been most often overlooked, the more powerful will be any influence we have in programming the values from those stories into the future. The second is leadership development. And by this, I want to distinguish from skills-based training within the heritage preservation field. We're not talking about the ability to better interpret Section 106 and apply it. We're talking about the ability to win friends, influence people, affect policy, and motivate people to follow your leadership vision. The third is data acquisition. We need to use the modern tools at our disposal to gather more data faster. Thousands of Section 106 reports that many of you have worked hard on are sitting, gathering dust on some administrator's shelf. If we digitize that data, then we can program computers to see connections between it in ways that the human mind currently cannot. And as you know, tens of millions of objects in government collections alone are uncurated with no immediate plan to deal with that backlog. We need to fix that as quickly as possible. Next is digitization. Take your existing knowledge, collections, paperwork, put it as quickly as you can online. The first stage, the easiest stage, I'll use an example what a lot of the SHPOs have done, is take all of the paperwork that was in a filing cabinet in their frequently flooded basement and scan that paperwork so you have a digital image. The second phase is to move those scans into a way that the language can recognize the words and start processing it, as opposed to just comparing pictures, which a computer views as indistinguishable from a picture of your favorite cat. Meaning extraction, the human experience, the ability to interact with a real live human being, and to extract stories from the work that you do that answer the question, so what? So we've done this amazing archaeological dig that has revealed stories of how people lived 10,000 years ago. We have to answer the question, so what, to a new generation of folks whose attention spans are starved for us getting to the bottom line. That doesn't mean we need to shortchange the intellectual effort and rigor that goes into this, but we need to be able to tell our stories in a way that's more meaningful and more human. The final two pieces are policy access. I'm quite confident I'm preaching to the choir here, but there is no excuse, no matter how troubled by the current political environment one might be, not to be actively engaged in one party or another in trying to affect policy generally, but in terms of preservation policy specifically. When you show up, people actually listen, and you can have an impact. And finally, programming access. You should track who in your field is pushing the envelope in good ways in terms of moving stories of our past into a more digital future. So I conclude with this final slide. In my 30-second analysis, I conclude that Star Trek, the original, was probably 70% right. The way it's portrayed, 150, 200 years from now, if we do our jobs, the art of leadership, human leadership, will still matter. The history will still be used to inform current decisions. Wisdom of all cultures will be harnessed. And Kirk, representing human passion, but also frailty and illogic, and Spock, representing computer logical intelligence, sometimes in the absence of emotion, work much better together than independently. What I suspect they got wrong is that Kirk and Spock will in fact not be two separate entities. For a time, we will have our pet robots that water our plants. But what we're seeing already is the integration of technology into our current human bodies to address things like Alzheimer's disease and disease. So in reality, if we film this show 50 years from now, we're likely to see maybe one actor instead of two. And finally, for the hope of all of us, let the fashion be better in the future than it is on Star Trek. If you have watched some of the early episodes, I have to cover my daughter's eyes. It's just appallingly bad. So here's hoping for a better, well-dressed future for humanity. I want to thank you for your time, your patience, and your attention. I will be around for the early part of the afternoon and accessible at this contact information if any of this excites or interests you further. But I just want to close by saying how deeply grateful I am to have been given the chance to come out and see this stunningly beautiful community and to meet some of you firsthand. Thank you all very much.